Good morning. Welcome to Westbridge Church. What a beautiful day it is today. At least it's not windy, right? My name's Jeremiah. I'm one of the pastors here, and it's great to have you with us. I want to say hello to everybody joining us online. Thanks for participating there. If you're in a parent viewing room, great option if you have small kids you prefer to keep with you during the service. And then those of you joining us in our cafe as well. And before we jump in, we're starting a new series today. Each year, we just call it Christmas at Westbridge, and brand new series today. But before we do that, on your Westbridge Church app, or on our website, but since you're here in service, if you're at home, just pull up the Westbridge Church app, and there's a couple of things. If you click on Christmas, a couple of things I really want to draw your attention to. One is something called Christmas Serve, or One-Time Serve. And what that is this. Each week we do 4 services, and so we have a bunch of volunteers who are committed all across all of our kids' spaces, and coffee, and greeters, and youth, and all of these things, just to pull that off every week. But last year at Christmas Eve, for our Christmas Eve services, we had almost 3,500 people, and we're expecting that again, and maybe even more, so we want to make sure we're ready for everybody. To pull that off, we have to do 7 services, and just in order to fit everybody, and to pull off 7 services, it requires a lot of volunteers. And so I want to ask you, would you consider serving at one of the services that you're not attending? So if you're attending a service for Christmas Eve, you're going to want to go into the click Christmas Eve and then reserve your seat. You want to start doing that actually now, because they're going to start to fill up probably this week. And then if you would go, man, whatever service I'm not attending, I would actually go to a different service and serve either in our kids area, that's a big one, or with coffee or greeters or something like that, because we just want to make sure that we're ready. And that doesn't sign you up to serve on the kids team forever and moving into 2026, okay? That just means, hey, I could serve at one of the Christmas Eve services as a one-time serve to make sure we can pull this off. So I want to encourage you to do that. Would you consider doing that? That will help us. Here's why this is so important. Not only do we have that many services, but Christmas Eve is one of those times where oftentimes people will say yes to an invitation when they may not any other time of the year. Their hearts just seem to be more open and more receptive to saying yes during the Christmas season. So for that reason alone, we're going to have a lot of guests walking through our doors, and I hope that you will consider inviting someone to join you and sit with you at a Christmas Eve service as well. We're going to have a very clear presentation of the good news of Jesus and amazing music. It's going to be such a great gathering, and I would love to have you here and be a part of that and invite someone to join you. So all of that, go check that out inside the Westbridge Church app, and we would love to have you be a part of that. Now, today, like I said, we're kicking off this brand new series, Christmas at Westbridge. This is such a fun time of year. Christmas cookies, Christmas trees, Christmas lights, Christmas cards, Christmas presents, and then, of course, one of the most fun parts of the holidays, Christmas movies. Christmas movies, and no, I'm not talking about Hallmark movies. Hallmark movies, which, by the way, if you have not seen a Hallmark movie, let me just let you in on what they're all about, okay? It's a girl from the big city gets a job assignment in her hometown. She has to go back to her rural community where she bumps into the local candy shop owner who is unbelievably attractive and yet somehow still single. And they reconnect. They were childhood friends. They reconnect under a gazebo. And he may or may not actually be Santa Claus as well. So if you have not seen a holiday Hallmark movie, you have now seen every Hallmark holiday movie, all right? You're welcome. There's a documentary on Netflix called The Movies That Made Us, and they highlight all these different movies from the 80s and 90s, and they go behind the scenes and sort of peel back the curtain and give you some little-known facts about these movies. One of the movies is the holiday classic Home Alone. And the Home Alone was actually a low-budget movie that ended up being a major blockbuster. It became one of the top-grossing movies of all time. And one of the things this documentary revealed was that the exterior of the house, this home in Chicago, is actually a real house in Chicago. It's still there. You can see it. But they didn't film any of it inside that house. They just took pictures of that house, film of that house from the exterior. The inside was actually a replica that was created in a high school up the street. And so they shot the whole movie inside of a high school nearby. Another Christmas movie they featured was Elf, and the director wanted to make it a timeless Christmas classic and insisted on no CGI, no digital effects. And so when you see what's the other? Will Ferrell. When you see Will Ferrell and he's a giant man living amongst the world of elves, all of that is through a technique called forced perspective. And so they're shooting it at different angles to make him seem taller, so it helps things seem larger or smaller or farther away or closer up. And then one of the biggest Christmas movie classics that they featured was the holiday classic, Die Hard. There's no better way to celebrate the birth of Jesus, right, than a holiday party where a bunch of people are taken hostage by, some kind of foreign terrorist, right? And the movie was filmed in and around Fox Plaza in Los Angeles. The building was so new, it was still under construction. So there were floors that were unfinished, and that's where they let them film Die Hard. Now, during the day, it was actually used, the floors that were finished were used as corporate offices and by attorneys. And so they were not allowed to film until after 5 p.m. and on weekends. Fascinating, right? And it's always fascinating when you kind of pull back the curtain and learn to discover new facts about something or see it from a different perspective. And that's what I want to do today. We're going to look at one of the most famous verses in the Bible. It's often quoted during the holiday season. And before we do that, I want to spend a few minutes sort of pulling back the curtain and looking behind the scenes so that we understand the context of the verse. It starts with the nation of Israel. When Israel first started, it was basically a large extended family. So you had Abraham, who was the sort of the patriarch of the family, and then God had made this promise to Abraham, through you and through your descendants, I'm going to bless the whole world. And so Abraham has a son named Isaac. Isaac then has a son named Jacob, and Jacob's name at some point in his life gets changed to Israel. And then Israel, or Jacob, has 12 sons. And each of those sons begins to multiply through the years. And their, generation after generation, they continue to multiply and multiply until they become a nation with a large population. And they become known as the Hebrews, or the Israelites, and they settle into a region of the world that we now know as the Middle East. It's roughly the size of New Jersey. And over time, Israel was able to form into a nation. They established a government where they were led by kings. Their first king was King Saul, and then along came King David. And when King David died, his son Solomon took over, and then you had King Solomon. And you had these three kings that each reigned. And then after the death of King Solomon, the nation of Israel actually went into a civil war. There were two different factions that wanted to move in different directions, and the kingdom of Israel split into two kingdoms, north and south. It became a big rivalry, almost as big as Packers and Vikings. I mean, a pretty big rivalry. Now, many of you might have been here a couple of weeks ago. My buddy Dave was speaking, and he happened to stay at my house for 10 days. And so he was there over 2 Sundays. And the first Sunday that he was here, the Vikings were playing the Packers. And the Packers destroyed the Vikings. And Dave, being from Wisconsin, I had to hear about it all day. Well, a couple of years ago, Dave moved to Seattle. Well, the following Sunday, the Vikings played the Seahawks and didn't score a point, and I had to hear about it all day. I mean, it's been a pretty rough couple of weeks on me, all right? But this is the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And the northern kingdom became known as Israel, the kingdom of Israel. And then the southern kingdom was known as the kingdom of Judah. And both of these kingdoms became strong, independent nations, but they were always at odds with each other, always at war with each other. And a couple of hundred years later, the political tension in this area really started to build up, mainly because another nation by the name of Assyria started to come into power. They were an incredibly powerful and ruthless empire, and the surrounding regions were afraid of the Assyrian empire. And so many smaller nations began to form a coalition or form alliances against the Assyrian Empire. And 2 of those nations were Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel, and another country called Syria. And Israel and Syria formed a coalition or formed an alliance against the Assyrian Empire, and then said, hey, Judah, we want you to join us. And King Ahaz, who was the king in Judah, refused to join that alliance. And so, as a result, then the nations, this alliance of Israel and Syria, decided we're going to attack Judah, and we are going to replace King Ahaz with a puppet king who will do our bidding. That way, we can put up the king that we want, he'll do what we say, he'll form an alliance with us, then we'll have 3 nations to go against the Assyrian Empire. And yet, the goal was just to dethrone him, and understandably, King Ahaz is terrified. He doesn't know what to do. He feels completely stuck. You have Syria and Israel on the one hand who are going against him and attacking him, and then you have the fear of the Assyrian Empire on the other hand that could completely wipe them out. And it seems like he is in a situation that has absolutely no good outcome. Now, before we continue with the story, this is oftentimes where we find ourselves, isn't it? Let me just ask you this question. Have you ever felt hopeless? And not just like, oh man, you had a bad day at work or a bad week because you're under a lot of stress. I'm talking about a time where you felt absolutely hopeless. I'm talking about a season of your life where it felt like everything was falling apart and you prayed desperately for God to intervene, but God didn't answer your prayer like you thought he would. And you just felt like there was no light at the end of the tunnel. And maybe it was a time you desperately needed other people because you felt completely overwhelmed, but for whatever reason, you ended up being alienated or feeling alienated by the people you needed the most. Or maybe there was a time when someone you trusted deeply broke that trust in a significant way, and it just felt like, man, the years you had invested in that relationship went to waste, and it seemed like that relationship was shattered, and you knew this is never going to be the same again. Or maybe you were in a pit of depression and it just didn't seem like any amount of therapy or medication was going to give you the strength you need to climb out of the pit you found yourself in. In 2006, our very first launch team we gathered together, my wife and I, with 12 other adults. We said, we're going to start a church. And we had just had our second daughter 2 days earlier. We brought her home from the hospital, and then that night we had a meeting with 12 adults and said, we think we're going to start a church. What do you think? It was a pretty low-stress day. And everybody said yes. And for the next almost 14 years, we met living room to a community center, to a movie theater, to Big Woods Elementary, to Middle School East, to Middle School West before we got here. And so for almost 14 years, we would load trucks and trailers into all of these various buildings. And there was this sort of this running joke, each year, when we built this on this property, it was our 27th attempt to build and to purchase property to build on. And so, it just was a long process. And so there were several years where I would try to encourage our staff, and I'd go, hey guys, man, we've got our sights on this next facility. I think this is the one. And we were under contract several times, and then it fell through, and I'd go, man, we're gonna get this, guys, Easter in the new building. And then Easter would come and go, and that would fall through, and we'd still be a portable church at Easter. And then the next year I'd go, guys, Easter in the new building. And then that would fall through, and this happened about 6 or 7 years in a row. 6, 7. And I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. I've been hanging out with teenagers every Wednesday night. It's in my blood now. I can't help it. And I don't know where that comes from. That's so weird. All right. And then this happened over and over and over again. So then 2019 comes along, and we build a facility. We've been portable for almost 14 years. We're like, yes. I'm like, guys, this is it. Easter in the new building. And there's nothing that can stop us, right? And then COVID hit. And it hit right before Easter. And guess how many people we had in this building on Easter? 0. Because we were online only. And I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. And so we closed, right? We had just opened a building. And now we had this, brand new mortgage payment. And we weren't allowed to use the building. And everybody's online. And so here, it just felt like, man, okay, 4 months we were shut down, and eventually we were able to start to come back in person. And guess how many people we had the very first service that we came back? 12 adults. The exact same number we started with in our living room. I was like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. It felt like 14 years had been wiped out overnight. I mean, it was like, what is happening here? And I'm pretty confident that most of us have gone through seasons where you just go, what is going on? Where you lose hope, where the odds are against you in really big ways. And it gets to the point where you just don't have any strength or resources to feel like you can keep going. And this is exactly where King Ahaz is at. This is where he finds himself. He's been attacked by 2 nations who have formed an alliance against him, and he's feeling the threat of the Assyrian Empire, and he does not know what to do. And in the midst of all of this drama, God sends a prophet named Isaiah. Now, a prophet is someone who comes and speaks to the people on God's behalf. And so he's bringing a message from God to the king. And the message that he gives to King Ahaz is pretty straightforward. He's saying, don't be afraid. Don't lose hope. Your enemies plan to destroy you, but God is going to watch over you. God's got your back. If you will put your trust in God, I promise you're going to be safe, and the nations that are rising up to attack you will no longer exist. Now, after hearing these words from the prophet Isaiah, King Ahaz has a choice to make. He can either decide that he's going to put his trust in God, he's going to step back, and he's going to just allow God to rescue them, or he can take matters into his own hands and be a little bit more strategic and personally get involved and try to implement a strategy and form an alliance with another country. And he decides to go with the alliance. And I can't blame him, because he goes with what he can see. He decides to make an alliance, not with Israel and Syria. He actually goes over to the Assyrian Empire and makes an alliance with the Assyrian Empire. Now, this is a very bad decision. Over and over again in his message to King Ahaz, Isaiah would make it clear that forming an alliance with Assyria and rejecting God is going to result in hardship and distress and difficulty. In fact, 3 different times he would use the language of those who reject God will be wandering in the darkness or experience dark despair. And so 3 separate occasions in this message to Ahaz, he talks about darkness, darkness, darkness. And then he's given this description of how things are going to unfold, and he pauses. And just like that, the narrative shifts. And here's what Isaiah says next. He says, "Nevertheless, that time of darkness and despair will not go on forever. The people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in a land of deep darkness, a light will shine." This sense of hopelessness is going to be interrupted. The storyline is going to change, and this is so important for us to understand, because one of the things we all need when we're overwhelmed is something, anything that points us to hope, right? If you're in a season of hopelessness, I know it doesn't feel like it, but you need to hear this. God sees you, and God is with you, even when it doesn't feel like it. And I obviously don't know what's going to happen in your life or your specific situation in the coming weeks or months or years, but I know that God can change the storyline of your life, because this is what God does. He rewrites our stories. He's able to take the chaos of our lives and bring order. God is able to take the pain of our lives and bring healing. God's able to take the fear that we live with and give us courage. He's able to take our bitterness and bring peace. God's able to take the ashes of our lives, and he's able to make something beautiful out of it. And so King Ahaz finds himself in a hopeless situation. And Isaiah makes it clear, even though there's going to be a dark season for the Jewish people, eventually hope will come. The darkness will not last forever. And I'm sure Ahaz is imagining, okay, well, this dark season that you're talking about is going to last a few weeks or a few months or maybe even a year. He has no clue that it would be another 700 years before the words of Isaiah would become a reality. And this is one of the most frustrating things about God, isn't it? God is rarely in a hurry. He rarely works on my timeline, and we hate that, don't we? Because we are used to things happening fast. Isn't it true? We've invented all kinds of things to help us live faster. We have invented cars and planes to help us get places faster. Last week, I had a flight, and I was going to a meeting. I serve on a board of another church, and we do a once a year in-person meeting. And I went to fly out last Monday morning, and we sat on the tarmac for 3 hours before we took off. It was a 3-hour flight. I'm like, I should be landing right now, and we haven't taken off yet. And yet, it's so interesting because how quick your perspective shifts. I'm like, I should have been there. That trip used to take months, right? I mean, if you drive it, it takes how long? 20 some hours, and like a 3-hour flight is nothing. I still got there on the same day, halfway across the country. That's crazy to think about. But we're so used to getting places faster. We have fast food so we can eat faster. And then at some point, we decided that's not fast enough. Put a window in the side of that building. I can't be getting out of my car and, let me just pull up. So now we pull up in our fast car and we get our fast food so we can eat fast while we drive fast. Think about that, right? We have fast internet with all kinds of G's. We've got 2-in-1 shampoo and conditioner. What a time saver, right? I mean, I can't be opening and closing all kinds of bottles and whatnot, I mean, we're so used to things. You could order something on Amazon Prime right now, and you expect it to be at your car by the time we're done with our service, right? That's how fast Amazon is these days. And we don't like waiting because we want what we want when we want it. And when is usually now. And we're not very good at waiting. And instead of waiting, more often than not, what we do is just impose our obsession with now on God. God, I need it now. I need you to move now. I need you to act now. But God is rarely in a hurry. And one of the reasons for that is this. God cares more about what happens in us than to us. God is in the business of doing something in us. We want God to change what's going on out here, and God wants to change what's going on in here. So we often look for external solutions to internal problems. And God's going, no, I want to do something in here. I'm not going to just immediately change everything here, but I want you to learn to trust me in here, even when all of this is going on. Something bad can be going on around you, and something really good can be taking place inside of you. It takes God time to chisel away at our heart, at our attitudes and our thinking and our worldview. So God rarely moves quickly. And then to add to the frustration, sometimes there's no obvious purpose for a season of waiting, except it just builds anticipation. I mean, most of us could deal with the pain if we knew the purpose, and we have no clue why we're stuck in a season of pain or difficulty. All we can do is just cling to God and trust that there will be light in the darkness. And for the Jewish people, it's another 700 years before Jesus showed up. And then, here's how Isaiah would describe when Jesus shows up, when this promised Messiah comes, this is how you will know. And this is the verse that we're going to unpack during this series. He says, those living in the land of darkness will not be in the darkness forever. One day a light will come. And then he continues and he says this, for a child is born to us. A son is given to us. The government will rest on his shoulders. Now, maybe you've heard this verse before. If you grew up in church world at all, you've probably heard this read during Christmas, but maybe you didn't realize the full context. Isaiah is giving this promise, this prophecy to King Ahaz, to the people who are wandering in darkness, who are afraid, and whose shoulders is the government currently resting on? King Ahaz. King Ahaz is feeling the full weight of the government on his shoulders. And Isaiah is saying, look, one day someone is going to be born. A king is going to be born. This anointed one, this Messiah, the king is going to come. And the government will rest on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. During this series, we're going to look at these descriptions of this coming Messiah. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. These descriptors given to Jesus are important because they are titles that point us to why he has come. And titles often communicate someone's level of responsibility or authority. It can reveal our level of expertise or education or the role we play in someone's life. And we all carry different titles, don't we? Father or mother, son or daughter, brother or sister, husband or wife, software engineer, teacher, doctor, judge, coach, pastor/fashion model. We all just carry these around, right? That's why these names are such a big deal, because God is disclosing to King Ahaz through the prophet Isaiah who God is. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. So I want to take the last few minutes we have together and unpack this one title in our gathering this morning. Jesus is a wonderful counselor. Jesus is a wonderful counselor. Now, there are all types of counselors that exist in the world today, right? There's marriage counselors and financial counselors. There are school counselors and rehabilitation counselors and grief counselors. And Isaiah describes Jesus as a wonderful counselor. So let's look at the word wonderful. This is a word that gets thrown around a lot today. We might use it when one of our kids does a great job at their, singing a solo at their choir recital. We go, oh, you sounded wonderful. We might say it when we meet somebody that we've been conversing with, and now we're meeting them in person for the first time, and we say, oh, it's wonderful to finally meet you. We even use the word wonderful sarcastically when we're stuck in traffic, and we go, oh, isn't this wonderful? And the word wonderful simply means full of wonder. That's primarily how it's being used in this description. When the Messiah comes, this one who comes to bless the world, he will produce wonder in people. He will leave people awestruck. They will be full of wonder and full of awe. Throughout the eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life, the number one response people had when they heard Jesus speak, it says this over and over again, that they were astonished or they were awestruck, right? They were full of wonder. Jesus had wisdom beyond his years. And then this word counselor indicates something else. A counselor is one who advises. A counselor is one who provides guidance and counsel. And at different points in our lives, we all need counselors or advisors or guidance, don't we? Even counselors need counselors because you can be an expert in one area but not another. And we are told Jesus is a wonderful counselor, and he's different than all other counselors. And Isaiah points this out by asking a rhetorical question. He says this, "Who's able to advise the Spirit of the Lord? Who knows enough to give him advice or teach him? Has the Lord ever needed anyone's advice? Does he need instruction about what is good? Did someone teach him what is right or show him the path of justice?" Implication is no, right? This wonderful counselor is in a category all by himself. And every one of us, whether we realize it or not, have the need of this wonderful counselor in our life. It doesn't matter what our IQ is or how much knowledge we've accumulated. We need a wonderful counselor. Because the decisions we make in life carry consequences. The choices that we make in this life play a big role in determining the life we have. And what's even more important is think about the choices we make. They don't simply impact our lives, they impact the lives of the people around us. So we need a counselor. We need someone to help us see the big picture. And it would be amazing if counselors just gave us the exact answers that we needed. We said, man, here's what I'm dealing with. And if counselors just went, no problem, let me give you A, B, and C, and if you check these off the list, everything's going to work out. That would be awesome. But counselors don't work that way, do they? In fact, here's some things that great counselors do. Great counselors teach people how to think, not what to think. They don't just say, hey, here's what you need to do. You do X, Y, and Z, and everything's going to work out. They more often than not help you learn how to solve problems. If you're a parent, you understand this because when it comes to our kids, it's very tempting to want to tell our kids exactly what they need to do in every situation in different seasons of their life. But if we're always doing that, our kids are never going to grow up and learn how to think for themselves. And if our children are going to become independent individuals, they can't rely on us to answer all of their questions and give them every decision. They must learn how to process and evaluate information. They must look at how to ask questions and make choices and take accountability for the choices they make and learn from them and learn how to creatively solve problems. So let me be clear, Jesus is a wonderful counselor. And yet, very rarely does he tell us very, very specifics that we're supposed to do in life. We want to treat it sometimes like a blueprint. God, give me everything exactly, right down to the, every last inch. But God treats it a lot more like a game plan. Hey, here's the game plan, but we're calling audibles and we're running it based on what the defense throws at us. And sometimes on rare occasions, he gives specifics, but that's not typically the way he works. Because we're not robots. God's given us the free will and ability to make decisions with lots of liberty. And oftentimes when it comes to job opportunities or selecting a college or selecting a career or figuring out who we're going to marry, we do our best as followers of Jesus to hear from God. But for the most part, God doesn't care where we work. He cares how we work. He cares how we treat our coworkers and our employees and our employer. He cares that we have integrity in how we do work. But he's not that concerned with what we do for work. He's not as concerned with where we live as he is concerned with what type of a neighbor we are. He's not as concerned with who we marry as he's concerned with how we conduct ourselves in marriage. What kind of a spouse we are. How we treat one another. People approach Jesus all the time with questions. And his most common response would be to ask them questions back. Isn't that frustrating? Have you ever talked to someone, you ask them a question, they're like, oh, it's a good question. Let me ask you a question. And you're like, But this is what Jesus would do often. Why? Because he teaches people how to think, not what to think. Here's something else great counselors do. They wait for their input to be invited. Have you ever noticed this? Counselors don't cold call people. Hey, how's it going? This is James. Yeah, I'm a counselor, and I just thought I'd offer you some guidance on your life today. Doesn't really work, does it? Right? No, great counselors wait for their input to be invited. And I think most of us would admit when it comes to God, we tend to invite his input into our lives when we're desperate. We tend to invite his input into our lives when we are in crisis. And if we don't like his input, then we can just ignore it. It's why we can sit through a talk, and if we don't like what's being taught, we can just leave and keep doing whatever we were doing before. And oftentimes, and I'll be honest with you, I'm guilty of this myself. I will treat God a lot less like a king and a lot less like a wonderful counselor who's giving me great guidance, and I'll treat him a lot more like a cosmic life coach. Like, all right, God, yeah, that's one option. All right, appreciate that. Let me see what else. Let me see what this magazine over here says, or let me see what this self-help book says, and I'll kind of measure it against yours and see which one feels the most comfortable for me. The reality is, a counselor's wisdom is only experienced when applied. Think about that. Well, there's a big difference between knowledge and wisdom, and I can know what to do, but if I do not use wisdom and put it into practice, nothing changes. I've lived long enough to know that people are willing to take counsel up to a certain point, but once it disrupts their comfort too much, they stop. And that's just the truth. No matter how much you know, nothing changes unless you put it into practice and apply what you know. And when I look back at my biggest mistakes and my biggest regrets, it wasn't because I needed more information. It was never a lack of information that led me to making bad decisions. It was a lack of wisdom. It was ignoring the voice of wisdom and not putting into practice the guidance of the wonderful counselor. If you want to experience the wisdom of Jesus in your life, it's going to require you to invite his input in your life. But it's also going to require you to begin to live out what you know he's asking you to do. Which means when you hear a teaching of Jesus, we do our best to obey. In fact, I would say this is a great definition of spiritual growth. I'm obeying Jesus faster than I used to. Yeah, I heard this teaching of Jesus, and man, I didn't want to do it, and I wrestled with it for 6 weeks. And then finally, I just go, no, I just got to do it. And I started putting it into practice. And now I heard this other teaching of Jesus, and I was wrestling with it. I didn't want to do it, but after 3 weeks, I put it into practice. That's called spiritual growth. I'm obeying Jesus faster than I used to. And if we're honest with ourselves, that's just not easy. And here's why. A lot of the things Jesus teaches are countercultural. They're counterintuitive. They go against the grain of how our culture operates. Think about some of the things Jesus taught. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. That isn't really a recipe for success in our culture, is it? Our culture says, no, you get ahead at any cost. But Jesus says, no, you treat people the way you'd want to be treated. He would say this, it's better to give than to receive. And we'd say, yeah, but it's pretty fun to receive. Jesus, how am I going to get ahead if I give? I would rather receive. Jesus would teach the person who is without sin should cast the first stone. But I'd rather judge people by their sins and their actions and judge myself against my intentions. Jesus would teach if someone hurts you, you forgive them. But Jesus, they owe me an apology. They owe it to me. They need to make it right, and then I will consider forgiving them, but not until they apologize. And Jesus would teach, look, that's only going to hurt you. You forgive because I've forgiven you. Jesus would teach the person who exalts themselves will be humbled, but the person who humbles themselves will be lifted up. That goes against everything in our culture that's all about self-promotion. Don't let the focus of your life be storing up treasure on earth, but store up your treasures in heaven. Jesus would teach this, love your enemies and pray for people who hurt you. In this way, you are most like your heavenly Father. You want to know how you reflect the character of your heavenly Father? It's when you love people who don't love you back. It's when you pray for people who have hurt you. Oh, Jesus, if I love my enemies, there's a chance they'll hurt me again. And also, that would require me to humanize them and seek to understand them. So many of the teachings of Jesus, so much of the guidance of the wonderful counselor cuts against our culture. And it's counterintuitive and countercultural. And in many ways, if I'm being honest, I'm like King Ahaz. It's easier for me to put my confidence in what is known rather than trust God in his timing. I'd rather put my hands around a strategy that's tangible, you know? I want to find relief as fast as I can rather than trust God and trust in God's timing. But when I choose to follow the wonderful counselor, there can be a lot of unknown. But the only way we will experience the wisdom of the wonderful counselor is when we embrace his wisdom for our lives and put it into practice. You want to see a light in the darkness? It's when you trust the guidance of the wonderful counselor. So let me ask you this question. If you're a follower of Jesus, we should be wrestling through this question. Where do you need to embrace his wisdom today? Where is it that Jesus has been telling you, no, let me guide you in this area of your life, and you've just kind of been resisting? Where have you been resisting him? Where do you find yourself resisting his guidance? Where do you find yourself resisting his wisdom? And what would it look like for you to embrace his wisdom and begin to obey in that area of your life? King Ahaz found himself in a hopeless situation. And Isaiah assured him that hope would eventually come. But he didn't have a lot of details, and he didn't have a timeline. He just asked him to trust God. And what he did say is that one day a king would come who would be a wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. So my prayer for each of us is that during this season, and especially if you find yourself in a season that feels hopeless, let's be honest, the holidays are the great magnifier. If you are experiencing a great year and things are going well, the holidays and the month of December just seems to magnify that. But if you're having a rough year and a difficult time and you feel stuck and you feel hopeless, then the holidays tends to magnify that as well, doesn't it? My prayer is that you'll experience the hope, the light of the wonderful counselor during this season in a real and personal way. If you're looking for hope in your life, one of the best things you can do is to embrace the wisdom and the guidance of Jesus, this wonderful counselor, as you continue to follow him. And if you've never said yes to following Jesus, here's what Christmas reminds us, that Jesus came into the world and that message is good news that brings great joy to all people. It reminds us that there is no mess, there is no situation that Jesus will not descend to in order to enter into relationship with you. That he wants to bring you light into the midst of what feels like a dark and hopeless season. And so you are invited to put your trust in Jesus, to forgive your sins. And this is the word the Bible uses, sin. When we fall short, the decisions we've made, we've ignored the wisdom of this wonderful counselor. The Bible calls that sin, just means we've missed the mark, we've fallen short. And here's the promise, that when you put your trust in Jesus, he will forgive your sins, and then he invites you to be a part of his family. So Jesus took our sin upon himself, and then he was put to death. His body was laid in a tomb. And according to multiple eyewitness accounts, hundreds of people saw Jesus alive again. I can never get over that. Hundreds and hundreds of people saw him alive again after he was dead. And that means he has overcome death. He has the power to forgive our sins. And then he invites us to be a part of his family, not because of anything we've done, not because we can earn our way into it or behave our way into it, but because of who he is, what he's done on our behalf. So if you've never said yes to following Jesus, you're invited. It might be the best decision you could make during this Christmas season. So whether you're watching online or here in the room, if you want to say yes to following Jesus, just agree with this prayer. God, please forgive my sins. God, forgive me for the times that I've walked away from you, and I'm so grateful you never walk away from me. Make me your son, make me your daughter. Help me to put my trust in you and follow you, God, as best as I know how from this moment on. I want you to be the leader of my life. I want to trust in your guidance. And God, I pray for every one of us, regardless of where we find ourselves, but particularly for those who are followers of Jesus and we find ourselves in a dark place where we feel stuck. Maybe we feel like there isn't a light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe it feels like a season of darkness. I pray, God, that you would bring light. That as we embrace the wisdom and the guidance of our wonderful counselor, God, into the darkness, a light would shine. God, may we be reminded that you are with us. God, that this is good news that brings great joy. So God, we love you, we thank you, and we pray this in your name. Amen.